My brother got everything. The house on Carver Street, the investment accounts, the car my mother had barely driven. And me? I got a dusty little sewing shop on the edge of town that hadn't seen a customer in 2 years. My husband laughed when the lawyer read it out loud. Not a small laugh, the kind that fills a room. 3 weeks later, he asked me to sign papers giving up any claim to the shop so he could sell it. That night, I drove out there alone. And what I found inside those 4 walls changed every single thing. Before I tell you what it was, make sure you like this video and subscribe to HeartPath Stories, because this one is going to stay with you. My name is Sarah. I'm 32 years old. I grew up watching my mother sew. She had a small alterations and tailoring shop called Clara's, named after her mother. It sat on the corner of Route 9 and Birchwood Lane, about 12 miles outside of Portland, Oregon. Nothing fancy. A front window with a faded mannequin. A hand-painted sign that had needed repainting since I was in middle school. A little bell above the door that rang every time someone walked in. My brother Marcus never set foot in that shop unless he needed something. He was 7 years older than me, already living in Seattle when our mother started getting sick. I was the one who drove her to appointments. I was the one who sat in waiting rooms and held her hand and learned how to talk to doctors in a way that made them actually listen. I was the one who stayed. My husband, Derek, knew this. He watched me do all of it. He even said, more than once, that he admired how close I was with her. But when the will was read, what Derek saw was numbers. And the numbers didn't look good for me. The attorney's name was Mr. Hollister. He had a calm voice and wire-rimmed glasses, and he read everything in the same measured tone, like he was reading a grocery list. The Carver Street property and all associated financial accounts will be distributed to Marcus Eugene Bellamy. Clara's alterations and tailoring, including the building, the equipment, and all contents therein, will be distributed to Sarah and Bellamy Ward. Marcus didn't even try to hide his smile. His wife touched his arm like they'd just won something at auction. Derek sat very still. I could feel the quiet coming off him like cold air. On the drive home, he didn't say much. He asked if I was hungry. I said no. He turned the radio on low and stared at the road. I watched the trees go by and told myself to breathe. That evening, my brother called. He was warm and gentle on the phone, which meant he wanted something. He said he had a buyer interested in the shop building, a developer who was looking at several properties along Route 9. He said the offer wouldn't be huge, maybe enough to split between us and call it fair. He said Mom probably didn't think it through all the way. He said it so kindly that for a second I almost agreed. I told him I needed time to think. He said, of course. Take a few days. 2 days later, Derek sat down at the kitchen table with a manila folder. He slid it across to me like he was doing me a favor. Inside was a quitclaim form. If I signed, the shop would be released into a joint account we'd both control. From there, we could sell it and split the proceeds. I asked him why it needed to go into a joint account first. He said that was just how it worked. I didn't sign. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Something felt wrong, and I couldn't name it yet, but I had learned a long time ago to trust that feeling. My mother used to say that instinct is just pattern recognition that hasn't caught up to language yet. She said that. She said a lot of things I didn't write down, and now wish I had. I drove to the shop the next morning before Derek was awake. I told him I was going to assess what was inside, figure out what to do with the equipment. He nodded and poured his coffee and didn't ask to come with me. The drive out to Route 9 was quiet. A gray October morning, fog sitting low over the fields. When I pulled into the little gravel lot beside the shop, I sat in the car for a minute looking at it. The sign. The faded mannequin in the window. The way the whole building looked tired but still standing. I had a key on my keyring that I had been carrying for years without thinking about it. It turned easily in the lock. The bell above the door rang when I walked in. The smell hit me the way it always had. Thread and old wood and something faintly floral, like a soap my mother had used for decades. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The long cutting table in the center, the dress forms along the far wall, the sewing machines covered with cloth. Spools of thread organized by color on a pegboard she'd hung herself when I was 9 years old. I walked through slowly. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I think part of me just needed to be in a place that still felt like her. Her desk was in the back room, behind a curtain. Small and cluttered and completely her. I sat down in her chair. It still had the cushion she'd tied to it with a piece of ribbon because the seat was hard. I opened the top drawer. Scissors, pens, a spool of elastic. Second drawer, order receipts going back years, bundled with rubber bands. I don't know what made me open the bottom drawer. It was heavier than I expected. Inside was a hanging file folder, thick with papers. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. The first few folders were ordinary: utility bills, insurance documents, a folder labeled equipment warranties. But then there was one that said Route 9 City Correspondence. I opened it slowly. The papers inside were letters. Official letterhead from the City of Portland Planning and Development Office. There were 6 of them, the earliest dated 4 years ago, the most recent dated just 5 months before my mother died. Each one referenced the same thing: a proposed commercial corridor expansion along Route 9. A rezoning initiative that would reclassify properties along a 2-mile stretch from residential and light commercial to full commercial use. High-traffic retail zone. The language was formal and a little hard to follow, but one phrase kept appearing: priority acquisition corridor. I didn't understand what that meant yet. I kept reading. Behind the city letters were letters from 3 different development companies. Each one had written to my mother at this address. Each one expressed interest in acquiring the property. One had included a preliminary offer figure. I stared at that number for a long time. It was more than Marcus's house on Carver Street was worth. Significantly more. My mother had written a single word in the margin in her handwriting. No. She had done that on every offer letter. Just that one word. No. In blue ink, in her careful, small script. I sat back in the chair. Why would she do that? Why would she hold on to this property when she could have sold it for that kind of money? She wasn't wealthy. There were years she drove 30 minutes each way to save $20 on groceries. Why had she kept saying no? I went back through the files more carefully. At the very back of the folder, tucked inside a plain white envelope, were 2 things: a folded document and a handwritten letter with my name on the front. My hands were not steady when I opened it. It was 2 pages, front and back, written in the same blue ink. Sarah, she had written. I hope you're sitting down. Knowing you, you're probably standing. Sit down. I laughed. I pressed my fingers over my mouth and I laughed, because that was exactly something she would say. I'll explain this as simply as I can, because I know Mr. Hollister will read you the legal part and you'll already be overwhelmed. The short version is this. The city has been trying to buy this property for 4 years. I said no every time. Not because I'm stubborn, though you might argue otherwise. Because I read everything they sent. I had an attorney look at it, and what the documents show is that this corridor expansion is happening whether the city buys my property or not. The road is going through. The rezoning is going through. The question was only ever whether I sold now for what they were offering, or waited until the commercial development actually began and negotiated from a position of real power. I could hear her voice in every sentence. She went on. I chose to wait, and I chose to leave it to you. Not because I love you more than your brother. You know it doesn't work that way. I left it to you because of what I've watched you do your whole life. You read things before you sign them. You ask questions until you understand the answers. You are patient in a way that most people aren't, and in this situation, patience is everything. Marcus would have sold this the week he got it, and that would have been fine. He would have gotten a fair price and moved on. But you won't do that. You'll read these letters. You'll make calls. You'll wait until the moment is right. My eyes were full. The folded document behind the letter was a land survey. The property lines were marked in black, but someone, my mother I assumed, had drawn a red line along the back edge of the lot. And a note in the margin said, Future highway access ramp confirmed per planning office call, March 14th. The back portion of her property sat directly adjacent to where a major highway on-ramp was going to be built. When that ramp opened, the corner of Route 9 and Birchwood Lane would become one of the highest traffic intersections in the county. I sat in my mother's chair for a very long time. Then I did something I almost never do. I cried. Not sad crying, or not only sad crying. It was the kind of crying that comes when you realize someone understood you completely, and now they're gone, and the only thing they left behind is proof of how well they knew you. I stayed in the shop for another hour, reading everything twice. Then I locked up, drove back toward the city, and called a real estate attorney before I pulled onto the freeway. His name was Robert Kessler. My coworker had used him for a property dispute 2 years earlier and said he was meticulous and honest and did not pad his hours. I got his assistant and left a message. He called back within the hour. I explained the situation without giving too much detail. Inherited commercial property. Potential rezoning situation. City correspondence going back several years. Significant developer interest. I need to understand what this property is actually worth and what my options are before I make any decisions or discuss this with anyone. Anyone, he repeated. Anyone, I confirmed. He had an opening the following Tuesday. I took it. What I did not do was go home and tell my husband what I had found. I know that might sound cold. Derek and I had been married for 6 years. He wasn't a bad person, not entirely. But I had felt something shift in him when the will was read. The way his face changed, the way the folder appeared on the kitchen table 2 days later, the quitclaim form, the joint account. He had already made a decision about what this property was worth, and he had already decided what should happen to it, and he had done that without asking me a single question about what I wanted. So, I decided to know everything before I said anything. I met with Robert Kessler on a Tuesday afternoon. I brought the full folder. He spread the documents across his desk and read quietly for 20 minutes while I sat across from him. His expression did not change. When he finished, he folded his hands and looked at me. He said, "This property is significantly undervalued by every offer you've received so far." I asked him to explain. He said the city letters confirmed that the rezoning was approved 14 months ago, which I had missed because the confirmation letter was dated after my mother's diagnosis and she likely hadn't processed it. The highway ramp construction was in the final permitting stage. Once that permit cleared, the property would move into what he called a hot acquisition window, where developers would be competing rather than presenting single offers. Competition drove prices up considerably. He asked how much time I had before anyone expected an answer from me. I said my brother had given me a few days, but that was weeks ago. My husband wanted me to sign something, but I hadn't. He said good. He said do not sign anything. He said I should let him make a few calls and come back Thursday. On Thursday, he told me the permit had cleared. Construction was beginning in 6 months. He had spoken informally with 2 contacts in commercial development, and both had expressed significant interest in the property. One had asked, without knowing the address, what price range we were considering, and Robert had given him a number that was nearly 3 times the highest offer my mother had ever received. The developer had said that sounded reasonable. I gripped the arms of the chair. Robert said there was one more thing he wanted to discuss. He said that when an asset of this value becomes part of an active divorce proceeding, the situation becomes complicated. He said he wasn't pushing me toward any particular decision about my marriage. But he said I should be aware that an inheritance received by one spouse is generally considered separate property under Oregon law, as long as it is not commingled with marital assets. The quitclaim form Derek had asked me to sign would have transferred the property into a joint account, which would have made it marital property. It would then have been subject to division. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, he knew that, didn't he? Robert said he couldn't speak to anyone else's intentions. But he said I had made a good decision by not signing. I drove home that evening, and I made dinner, and I sat across from my husband at the kitchen table, and I talked about my day in the most ordinary terms I could manage. I said I'd met with an attorney about the shop. I said it was going to take some time to sort everything out. I said I wasn't ready to make any decisions yet. Derek asked if the attorney thought it was worth anything. I said it was hard to tell at this point. He nodded and finished his food and said to let him know what I found out. I said I would. 2 days later, I filed for divorce. I did it quietly and through Robert, who connected me with a family law attorney in his firm. I told Derek in person, on a Saturday morning when we were both home. I was calm. I had written down what I wanted to say. He was shocked at first, then angry, then he tried to have a conversation about working things out. I listened. I told him my decision was final. He asked if this was about the shop. I said it was about a lot of things that had been building for a long time. Which was true. The shop just made me see them clearly. He moved out within the week. Marcus called me about 10 days after the divorce filing. His voice had lost the warmth it usually performed. He said he'd heard from Derek, who had apparently told him I was sitting on something valuable and refusing to share information with the family. Marcus said he hoped I wasn't going to be difficult. He said Mom would have wanted us to handle things together. I let him finish. Then I said I was still reviewing my options and I would be in touch when I had something to share. He said that wasn't good enough. I said I'd talk to him soon, and I ended the call. The developer meetings happened over a 3-week period. Robert handled most of the communication. I attended 2 in-person meetings and said very little, which Robert had coached me on. Let them talk. Let them tell you how much they want it. Don't fill the silence. I am not a naturally quiet person, but I followed his advice. By the time the 3rd meeting came around, we had 3 competing offers on the table. Real numbers. Serious numbers. Robert laid them out side by side and walked me through each one. The highest was from a company called Meridian Commercial Partners. They wanted the full property for a mixed-use development, a gas station, a fast food pad, and a small retail strip. Given the highway access that was coming, they projected the location would be one of the top-performing commercial corners in the county within 5 years. The number they were offering was more money than I had ever seen in one place in my life. I did not cry this time. I sat very still and breathed slowly and thought about my mother writing no in blue ink in the margins of letters she had been holding onto for 4 years. I asked Robert what he thought. He said he thought we could get them up another 8% if we held out a week. He thought the second highest bidder would also come up if they knew the gap. He said it was my call. I said, let's wait a week. He smiled and said, your mother taught you well. We got them up 11%. I signed the final agreement on a Thursday morning. I kept a small retained interest in the development revenue for the first 3 years, which had been Robert's idea and which I initially thought was too complicated, but turned out to be one of the smarter pieces of the whole arrangement. It meant the money didn't stop when the sale closed. My brother texted that afternoon. He'd heard through someone, a mutual contact, that I'd sold. He wanted to talk. I called him back. He started with how surprised he was. He said he wished I'd brought him in on the process. He said families should work together on these things. Then, after about 4 minutes of that, he said he thought he might have some claim to the proceeds since the property had originally belonged to both of their parents. I let him finish. Then I said, Marcus, Mom left the property to me. Legally and completely to me. Robert Kessler has reviewed everything and there is no claim. If you want to discuss it further, you're welcome to contact him directly. A long pause. He said he didn't think Mom would have wanted it to go this way. I said I thought about that too. And I think Mom knew exactly what she was doing and why. He didn't have an answer for that. The divorce was finalized several months later. Oregon law was clear on inherited property that had not been commingled. Derek received nothing from the shop sale. His attorney tried a few angles. None of them held. Robert had anticipated all of them. Derek called me once, the week after everything was settled. He asked if we could have coffee and talk. He said he respected what I'd done, even if he hadn't understood it at the time. He said he thought we'd made mistakes on both sides. I told him I wished him well. I meant it. What I didn't say, because it wasn't cruel enough to need saying out loud, was that the week he slid that quitclaim form across the kitchen table was the week he showed me exactly who he was. Not a bad man, just a man who saw the value in something and immediately started thinking about how to get his hands on it, without once asking what I needed or wanted or thought. My mother used to say that the people who love you ask questions. The people who want something from you have answers ready before you've spoken. She was right about that. She was right about a lot of things. The construction on the highway ramp started in April. I drove out to Route 9 on the first day they broke ground and stood in the gravel lot where I used to park when I came to visit her after school. The sewing shop was already gone. Carefully deconstructed, the sign saved and sitting now in my living room. I watched the machines and the orange vests and the surveying equipment, and I thought about a woman who spent decades in a small room with a needle and thread and a bell above the door, quietly watching the road outside, reading every letter that arrived, writing no in blue ink, waiting for the right moment, and then leaving it all to the daughter who she knew would read everything twice before she signed a single thing. I don't drive out there much anymore. The construction is loud and the lot is gone, and there's nothing left that looks like what it was. But sometimes, on quiet mornings, I think about that bell above the door. The way it rang when you walked in. The way she'd look up from whatever she was working on and say, "There you are," like she'd been expecting you specifically, like out of everyone who might have come through that door, she had hoped it would be you. I know now that she was right to hope.